Have you ever made a top or a dress and you love how it's turned out in the sewing department, and when you try it on, you find that the side buster is not fitting you correctly? It's either too high or too low, or if you've made something with a princess seam, you've got extra bunching here and it's tight at your bust height. Well, today's video is going to be touching on those topics: how to lower the bust height of a pattern, has a side buster, and also two types of princess seams. So it's going to be really practical. Keep watching. Hi sewing friends, I'm Karina from liftingpinsandneedles.com. Welcome to this channel that is all about sewing, limitless sewing. Now today's video has been requested to me for a long time. I have shown sprinkles of all these things throughout my videos in these 3 years, but I've never made a dedicated video about the topic that would be easier for you to go back and reference if you find that you're having these fitting issues. So I mentioned that I was going to talk about side bustards and princess seams. Obviously, pattern designers have a standard bust height that they use when they draft a pattern or what they base their block on. And it might not be your bust height depending on many factors, you know, your height, if you're petite, if you're taller, if you have a larger bust, just anatomical differences where your muscle is located on your chest, that your bust might be higher or lower than the standard, because a standard is just a standard. It doesn't mean that it's going to match your body. I have found over the years that even though when I was younger and I had a smaller cup size, a B cup size, I still had a lower bust height than the standard. Over time, that difference has become larger as I've gained weight and age and the cup size. I am a C cup size now, and I find that usually with most pattern companies I will need to lower what they've drafted there by an inch approximately. Some brands include separate bodices for, you know, A, B, C, D, E, F cup sizes. Then sometimes if I choose the pattern that is for my cup size, I will need to make an adjustment that is smaller. But still, it's been very rare that I don't need to lower either a side bustard or alter the shape of the princess seams to fit me better. And I want to touch first on side bustards. When you see a pattern has two darts on the side, they are great. If I see a pattern with them there, I'm pretty happy. I know I'm gonna be able to tweak that and get a good fit. Sometimes patterns don't have the dart visible there, but it is there. It's only that they've transferred that volume off to another place, either flared it out to be more swingy style or taken it up to the neckline. If you've seen a video I've done recently of my red harmony blouse where I threw all that dart volume up into the neckline, you know, there's lots of things that happen with designs like that. But when you see a dart there on the pattern, you know, if it's not at your bust height, it's gonna give you a pretty wonky fit. It's not going to look good. And I've tried things on the shops where that bust dart, instead of being right there, is like up here, pointing up to my upper chest. And I've seen people on the street happily wearing their ready-to-wear clothes that fit them like that. And, you know, they're pretty happy in their bliss of not knowing what correct fit should be. But at this stage of sewing and knowing what I know and what I can do to patterns to get the right fit, I can't ignore that dart and not do anything with it, you know, knowing that I need to lower it. And I think lowering bust darts is a pretty common thing. I think a lot of women need to do that. And I thought I'd make a practical video about it. So there's different types of side bust darts in the shape that you can see on patterns. Some of them are pretty straight, and I'm putting some diagrams here. So from the side, you see that they go straight across the middle of the dart, and then you have the dart legs, the top and the bottom. They're pretty equal distance and they go right across. The shape that you see hanging off the side seam where the dart has been folded and trued is pretty even as well. One example of a dart like this is the harmony blouse from Love Notions. With the stripes there, you can see where the dart is, and if I put it like that, you can see that the seam is pretty horizontal, pretty perpendicular to the grain line. And that, I think, is the easiest dart to modify and to fit. It's a straight dart, it's gonna fit, it's good. Actually, on Love Notions patterns, there is a little cross with a circle on the pattern piece itself, and it's really easy to see where the height was drafted for on the pattern, thus it's easier to adjust. Now what I'm going to show you here about drawing rectangles, very easy with a straight dart, because you just take the two dart legs, the top and the bottom, go across and draw your rectangle. Now there are other darts that are just design features. Some are angled down. I couldn't find an example of that one in my wardrobe actually at this point, but I have sewn them. So the dart is just angled down. It is directed to the apex that was drafted there. Sometimes you don't know where the apex actually is on the pattern, and you will see that to do this type of rectangle, to move all this down, you're going to need to take into account the top dart leg, go across, down, crossing the dart point, and then going straight across to be able to move that down. I have an example of this dress I made using Butterick 6684. I've shown this the other day, just a few days ago, where the dart is angled up. And if I move, you can see the light there. You can see it goes like that. Now, when the dart is pointing upwards, to draw your rectangle, you start at the bottom leg of the dart, go straight across, up the dart point, and then straight across the other way, and that's how you move it down. You have to take those things into account with these angled darts. It's not as straightforward as the straight dart, but not harder. You just have to look and see. When I was making this pattern was that I did this modification and filmed what I'm going to be sharing with you. I have the front here. Both of these views have a side bust dart, and as usual I need to lower this. So I'm just going to run down quickly what I'm going to do. Up here I marked the seam allowance, that's 5/8 to an inch. I just drew a line, and from there I grab my ruler, discounting that seam allowance, and I just measure down, and my bust apex is there at that measurement right there. And look where this dart finishes. It finishes way above, like I would have a dart like up my armpit. So that measurement that I measured, that I know by heart by measuring from the nape of my neck down to the highest point of my bust, I just continued that line here in a dotted way. I will show you. So you can see the dotted line right there. I just extended it to here, and this is where the tip of the dart here, the dart point, is originally for size 18. Now there's lots of darts here, and to not get confused, I just marked over my dart with green there, the size 18 dart. Positioning the center forward there on one of the lines of my cutting mat so that it's really straight there. Then I take my ruler and I guide myself by the distance here on the lines, and I draw a rectangle there from the dart point of the original dart all the way to the side. And then here on the dart leg, the bottom one, I extend that rectangle there, making sure these lines are perpendicular to the grain line. So I really want a perfect rectangle. And then the other one completes it there to the dart point. Now that red dot is my height, and I mark that circle beyond that line, and now I'm just going to cut out this rectangle. Okay, and this is the tip of the dart, right? Now I want it to match my red dot, which is my height. So I'm just basically sliding this down, keeping everything here on the side the same. I'll just put my scissors there to put some weight, and I will tape this down there. So the original shape of the dart, how they drew the dart to the side seam, is not lost. You know, it's still there, it's just lower. And you can see I have a gap to fill here, 1.5 inches approximately. And I just use all the scrap paper I have. I don't really care if the pattern looks pretty, so I'm just going to put whatever paper I found behind it and just close that gap. Now here on the side seam, I just need to join these two lines. There's a slight curve there, so I'm going to use the curved ruler and just join these there. And that's it, really. Okay, so this is the same dart, same shape that has been trued when this is closed to have an even side seam that's not lost. And this new red dot is my height that I've extended from there where I measured, and now the dart is going to finish in an appropriate position in regards to my apex. Otherwise it would have been all the way up there where the original was. So this doesn't change the length of the side seams. You don't have to worry about the back, it's going to match. It's just that this has been taken down to where you need it to be. And this is very common. It is a very common thing that you need to fit. Having a poor fitting dart that is not positioned correctly is just going to make anything not fit correctly from the top down. So this is really important. This is a final step I'm taking to make sure everything is correct with the dart, especially on the side seam. Here is the area that I added that you just saw. Now I've put pins there to pretend I'm closing the dart as if it would be sewn. And when you sew your dart, you're going to press all this volume towards the bottom, right? And when I press this towards the bottom, that should match there on the side. You know, you can see an even line there. So this is okay for this dart. In other darts that you might do, when you lower them, there might be some discrepancy here that you need to clean out, and through the shape of these side seams, just have one long, even line. You know, you might have something jagged, and depends on the shape of the darts. These are angled, as you can see, going up. There are other darts that are straight. You know, you can find all shapes of darts. So this is a step I never skip. I've seen that this matches when I press this down, and then I'm sure that this dart is going to work correctly when I actually sew it on fabric and sew my garment. So all these types of shapes you can see on the sides of darts are correct. They are meant to be there. There is one aspect I haven't included in this video. Now, some really fitted bodices have the side bust dart and then have a waist dart as well. This is the Sonata dress, and there is a side bust dart there, and there is also a waist dart there. So if you have needed to lower your dart on the side, you'll probably need to see the dart on the waist and make it shorter. You might need to lengthen the bodice depending on your body, but you can't have these darts touching each other on the side and on the bottom. You do need that waist dart to also have a distance from your bust height. Your bust circle, it needs to be at least an inch away further if the bust is larger. So you do need to look at the waist dart if you've lowered the bust dart on the side. But I'm not talking about these on this video. I'm talking about this one because it's the most common one you will see on more relaxed fit clothing, blouses, dresses. They will have a lot of these side bust darts, and the waist darts are usually not there, or they're optional. And they're only there if the style is super fitted. I hope that was clear. Now, one thing I'm not touching on my channel, and I haven't shown it because it's an adjustment I don't need to make. I don't do it on myself. Thus, I don't have the experience in order to show you how to do that because I can't test it on my body. I don't do full bust adjustments. Most patterns, I would say all of the patterns that are drafted for B cups, I have a C cup, but they fit me. I don't need to do a full bust adjustment, so I don't do them. I've had many questions asking me, how do I do my full bust adjustments? And believe me, if I had been doing full bust adjustments, I would have already shown that on the channel because I show everything that I do. I am not the only sewing resource on the internet, of course. There are 1,000 other videos, 1,000 other makers that do these adjustments very frequently, and there's lots of good resources about how to do full bust adjustments, and there are so many ways to do them as well. What I can say is that if you need a full bust adjustment on a pattern that has a dart on the side, you need to do that first. Usually your dart will become larger, and then after you've done your full bust adjustment, then you cut out your rectangle and you lower the bust height to your bust height. So that's what I'm going to say about that. Now, about princess seams. I have some knit dresses with princess seams. This is the Talon dress from Itch to Stitch that I've made recently. This is the Margot Peplum from Love Notions. I've chosen this one because you can clearly see the princess seams there with the stripes. This is a busy print, so you really can't see. Now, these are knit fabrics that have two-way stretch, horizontal and vertical stretch. Other people call that four-way stretch. Anyway, they do stretch this way and this way. This particular fabric stretches the same both horizontally and vertically. This ITY stretches more horizontally, but there is quite a nice stretch vertically as well. So I did do muslins for these. I did really quick muslins. You've seen the muslin I made for my Talon dress, and I just turned it into a crop top because it was totally wearable. And one of my aims of doing that muslin was seeing if I really needed to lower that curve and drop that volume down, because when I looked at the curve and did my measurements, I thought, yeah, I need to adjust about 1/2 inch. But these fabrics stretch vertically, so you need to consider that when you fit. So when I made the muslins, I thought this fits perfect. I don't really need to do this adjustment. I didn't do it. But when I have woven dresses with princess seams, you can't skip it. If you don't lower the bust height on the princess seam, you're gonna have bunching up here, and you're gonna have a really tight bust height on your bust height, because that's when the curve is already coming into the waist. So I think you can't skip it on the woven. Now this is a little tank top I made myself with scraps. And you can see this is a princess seam that originates from the armscye and curves like that. Now I self-drafted this. I made this from my block. My block is drafted for my measurements with my bust height. And I've transformed that basic block that has a side bust dart and a waist dart into different things. And I did make a pattern with a princess seam. And this is that, and it fits me to perfection. It fits me perfect. There's no bunching up here. It's all following the shape of my bust, having the fullness where my bust fullness is. So that's the amazing thing about creating your blocks. You can have a play and make different things like this. And I have an example I'm going to show you using the button-up dress from Peppermint. It's a free pattern that is downloadable, and I'm planning to make it. So while I was doing my adjustment, I filmed it for you, and that's coming next. Here we have the two main pieces of a bodice that has princess seams. So what I'm going to show you is going to work when you just have a bodice that stops at the waist and then there's a skirt attached, or a dress that has a full center front all the way down to the hem and a side front that goes all the way down to the hem. I'm using the Peppermint button-up dress from In the Folds. It's a free pattern as an example because I'm actually planning to make it myself, so I might as well do this adjustment before, you know. So I have the center front here and the side front there. Now I did go ahead and measure the bust height for this pattern. Usually you will find on princess seams that you will see where the widest part is, and there's usually going to be a notch there. Here I've marked it with a marker so you can see a bit more clearly. There's a notch there and there's a notch there, and it actually does coincide with how wide this part is compared to here where it starts going in, and this is where the curve is going up. Some princess seams have a different curve here. It goes up higher. This is the way this was drafted. Anyway, I have a measurement that I know from measuring myself from the nape of the neck down to the highest part of my apex. And usually most patterns won't have the seam line marked. This one actually does. There's a faint gray dotted line that marks the 3/8 of an inch seam allowance that this pattern has. So that makes it easy to measure, discounting that seam allowance from there down. Now, where this notch is for this pattern, I have drawn a horizontal red line across there that you might be able to see. And I put a ruler there from the top, discounting that seam allowance. I can see that the bust height for this pattern is 29 centimeters. That is 11 inches and 3/8. And this is quite a common height that I see in many pattern companies. The Big 4 pattern have an even higher bust height, usually at 28 centimeters, so 11 inches. Yeah, sometimes when you get patterns that do have cup sizes and then you go into the C, D, E, F cup sizes, the bust height is drafted lower because it is assumed that the bigger the cup size, the lower the apex, and that is totally right. This one is being drafted for a B cup. Anyway, I have marked a little green across there. So the difference from what they draft, 1 inch and 1/4, I would like to move this down. So you can see the curve coming down here. I'm going to start around 1 inch higher than what this bust height was drafted for. So I'm going to draw a rectangle about 1 inch higher than that. You can see the width here, and I'm just going to take about half the distance So I have my first line there, and then from the bust height line that I drew, I'm gonna go down 2 inches. This is why I'm working on my cutting mat. It's so practical because I don't have to be measuring. I can guide the ruler on the lines there on the cutting mat. So I have a rectangle here, and I'm gonna do the same over here. I've placed them side by side so that it's super easy to make these adjustments make sense, because what I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So I'm gonna actually use the grain line mark there as part of my rectangle. So you can clearly see my rectangles here. This is why I have them side by side. The notches there for the bust at the bust height are at the same line on my cutting mat. I've made it in a way to facilitate having rectangles that match each other on both sides, on the side front and the center front, and now I'm gonna cut them out. Okay, so now that I've cut these out, you can see I can just move these down the 1.25 inches that I needed. So I've got my cutting mat there, and I can see my 1 inch and my 1/4. So I'll secure that, and I'll do the same on the other side. So in the same way, this cup needs to be filled with paper. I'm just taking any paper and putting it behind there and closing this up. And then I'm gonna fix these curves here. Okay, so I have paper here. I've got a big mess right there, and these lines need to be cleaned up. I really want to keep that notch right there, that mark. It is going to be at my bust height. So that notch that we have there that was from the original draft, by dropping it, is now at my height. So I want to keep that there, and then this curve just needs to be fixed. Okay, so that's how the center front looks now. I've just made that curve smooth there, cleaned out the lines on the side, and I still have my notch. I have my notch here on the other side, and now this curve is a hot mess. I basically want to have the fullest part at the notch mark there. So I'm gonna find some type of curve here that is going to match this. So at my bust height, this is the widest bit now, and then I've just softened that curve. Remember, I don't need that curve to be extra pronounced. I don't need extra space up there because my fullest part is not up there, it's down here. Okay, and now you can see that the curve has changed. You know, this is fuller now here at my apex, you know, 1.25 inches lower than what was drafted. Both notches are gonna match. This distance up above is also going to match. And that is essentially it. The distance that I filled in there was what I lowered, 1.25. And of course that would change with each different body. Now, one thing I'll say about this type of adjustment on princess seams. When you've done your adjustment for your princess seam pieces, the front and the back, then you need to do your full bust adjustment if you need to do that. So it's sort of opposite to what I said about the darts, where you need to do your full bust adjustment first and then drop your bust height. In this case, you need to drop your bust height first and then do your full bust adjustment. And that is information I have from reading and doing research before filming this video, because I did want to mention that in case you do need to do these adjustments on your patterns. I don't, but I want to give you that information at least. So the other type of princess seam that is actually my favorite is the one that comes from the sort of mid-shoulder, from here down. I find that the curve here is easier to manipulate, and especially if you have a larger cup size, when you try and do a princess seam from the arm side, you're going to get a really pronounced curve that sometimes is pretty difficult to sew and have look smooth. If your bust volume is larger, I think having a longer section here for that amount of bust volume to fit, and because it's a straighter seam, I think it looks smoother and it just fits better, in my opinion. This is the Kalispell dress from Itch to Stitch. This one is really printed, so I'm you know, you're not gonna see. But there is the seam that goes down. You can see this is all floppy because that's where my bust would be. And then it goes into the waist. This is a fitted style. This has a neckband that prolongs the center front piece there. And I made the adjustment for this pattern, and I'm going to show you how to modify, very similar to what I've done with the princess seam that comes from the armscye, only this one's coming from the shoulder. Very similar, and that's coming in next. Here I have the bodice of the Kalispell dress from Itch to Stitch. This is a more fitted bodice. The one I've just shown you before, the peppermint dress, is a style that's more relaxed. So even though the adjustment I need to make on this dress is less, I still think it's important. Now the adjustment I need to make on this dress specifically is less because this one has cup sizes. I'm working with a C cup. I've marked the bust heights there where the notches are. They are already there. And this pattern has a band that goes into the center there. So I did have to attach the band right there to the center front in order to have the highest part here of the neck. So if I didn't include this band and measured from there, my measurements would be wrong because this is not the completed center front for this dress. You can see the top here of the center front. I have marked with red the 1/2 inch seam allowance that this pattern uses, and from there, from where the nape of my neck would be, that's where I measure down in this case. I've measured and put a red line across the height of the bust for this pattern, and in this case I only need to adjust 1/2 inch. So I put a little cross there where my bust height is. It's only 1/2 inch difference. It's much less than others I have adjusted, but I still think it's important to adjust because this is a fitted bodice. So even a small discrepancy might give you some sort of fit problem. So I am going to do it just the same. I did it just the same as the one that you saw before. I drew a rectangle about 1 inch higher than the bust height there and 2 inches lower, and I'm just going to cut this out and lower it. I've cut them out and I'm going to lower them by 1/2 inch. Of course I'm using the cutting mat down there to guide myself. I'd rather do this simultaneously, adjust both pieces at a time, and have them placed right there, right next to each other, so everything makes sense, rather than working on one piece and then the other piece separately. So I'm going to clean out these lines too. There's a little discrepancy here. Okay, so those are the new pattern pieces. This horizontal line that signifies the bust height is now at my bust height, 1/2 inch lower than the original. You can see there where I've lowered it down. This does not change the total length of these pieces. They are just the same. They're just in a different shape, allowing the fullness of the bust to be a little bit lower than what was on the pattern. There are bodices that finish here and then have straps and have princess seams. I have the Hollyoak dress that I made last year. This one, actually, the princess seam comes from the armscye originally and curves into there. You can see where it starts there. So it's basically comes from the same pattern that has all the shoulders and everything. It's only that volume has been taken from here to bring it in so that it's nice and close at upper chest, and then the straps come. So doing flat measurements on these types of patterns is pretty hard unless the pattern tells you there is the bust height that we drafted with some sort of mark. So for this one, I did make a rough bodice to find out if this was correct for me, including the length of the straps. Sometimes you want to play and adjust with the length of the straps, and that is something you need to determine first, where you're comfortable, and then see if this curve is too high or too low for you. I do think that fitting this type of dress is more complex than the normal ones that, you know, have an armscye and a shoulder seam. This is the same one. This is the second time I've made it, and this one was so much fun because I'd already done the fitting here. You know, cashmere drafts for larger cup sizes, and they have a bodice for a C and D cup. You know, they have them grouped in twos. It is slightly an issue for me. Whenever I have to use a pattern that is drafted for a C and D cup in the same, because I'm a C cup, I find that I have too much excess here anyway, even though the bust height might be correct. So I always think these dresses are a bit more complex to fit, but worth it because they are beautiful. This has a really thick strap that covers the bra. You know, I like these types of designs. I love them even more because they use less fabric, in my opinion. So that's the reason I like them as well. But yeah, I would say these dresses are a step above. Your princess seam dress has a shoulder seam and a proper armscye and everything. I think doing adjustments on those is much easier than on these. Princess seams are fair game. You know, you can put them on, you can drape the excess, you can pin away. You know, they are very customizable. Now, this dress I made late 2017 to celebrate that I was moving to Brazil. I found this fabric that sort of represented what Brazil meant to me, green. I had lived in Brazil before and I already knew how the place was and how green it was, and I made this dress for myself. Back then in 2017, I was mainly self-drafting. I wasn't able to get PDF patterns because we didn't have a credit card and we couldn't make online purchases. So from my blog again, I drafted this bodice, but this one has princess seams coming from here, from the center. So they originate from the shoulder on the bodice block. And I mentioned that I preferred that, and that's why I drafted this bodice like that. So from the middle of the strap, there's a seam there and it goes down, and I think it's much easier to fit. I drew the block in theory with all my measurements and I made it and it fit. I didn't even make a muslin because I know it's going to fit because it has my measurements. So you can find these style of dresses with the princess seams coming from here or from there, only that all this top section of the pattern isn't there, you know, there's straps instead. I have measured myself extensively in one of the first ever videos on my channel when I showed you how to draft my bodice block. I had a tight cami and I measured everything that I needed to know and just put on a well-fitting bra. I usually buy the same brand of bras and wear the same bra every time because I have several of the same. So I have my well-fitting bra. Take your tape measure from the nape of the neck. Usually this is where patterns are going to start, at the highest of the shoulder slope. So there's my highest. Look at the number, 31.5 centimeters. That's like 12.25 inches. So it can change by the 1/4 inch, more or less, depending on the bra you're wearing. You know, you've gained or lost weight, it can move a little bit, but not that much, I find. So I have this measurement, 12.25 inches, in my brain. I know it by heart. I take my patterns, I measure them, I mark where my bust height is, and then I go ahead and find out where the patterns one is, take the difference and adjust. So it is not that difficult. Measure yourself, find out where that measurement is for you, and it's going to make a world of difference to your fitting. I hope you don't shy away from patterns that have side bust darts or princess seams. If you enjoyed this content, give it a like. If you want to see a lot of more practical videos exactly like this, subscribe to this channel, tap on the bell so you don't miss out when videos go live. I will see you very soon in a few more days with another sewing video. Bye, and stay safe, stay at home please.